fact that there are certain things that come up before us that might detour us or distract us or take us off the path. We learn to adjust. We keep seeking our ultimate destination, right? And God helps us to work it out. We're glad you're here in person. I want to welcome those who are part of our class online and give a shout out to a couple of friends. Richard and Dawn live in Bozeman, Montana, and we are connected through the Yellowstone Bible Camp. We welcome you, Richard and Dawn. Also, Rebecca is in Guatemala, and she was one of our students in the World Trade Center many, many years ago. And we're happy for each one that is either with us live or else you're watching the program at another time. Tonight we're going to talk about betrayal. If you'll open your Bible to Genesis 37 and to see how favoritism and jealousy over a period of time foment and grow until finally some action takes place as a result. And so unless we deal with favoritism and jealousy early on, we're going to have those repercussions down the road. One mom was asked, "Do you have a favorite child?" She said, "I certainly do, but it's rarely the same one 2 days in a row." One little boy was bragging, "I'm my parents' favorite child." And his friend said, "That's not fair. You're an only child." The disciples argued about who's on first, what's on second. I don't know who's on third. Even at the Last Supper, Luke 22 records that this was the discussion. Jesus washing their feet, and they're talking about who's going to be on the top of the list. One of you, Landon, noted that when you show favoritism, you create a totem pole, and by giving the attention to the one at the top, you're also sending a message to the one down below that they are not loved. Michael DiPaolo talked about his girls, and he discovered they were both his favorites, but in different ways. One loves to cook, and the other loves to be outdoors. Kind of reminded me of Jacob and Esau a little bit. But now with his grandchildren, he asked each one, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I've taught my young ones you can do anything you want to do. Let me help you do it." Nancy was telling me that their parents treated her and Mary well, but the grandparents had a favorite, their older sister, and made it quite evident that that was, as some would say today, the golden child. But their own mother and father made every effort to keep things the very best between them. Rhonda wrote me too, and she said that there were times when she and her brother, there was some jealousy, some rivalry. How many of us can say we had that in our homes? But over time, neither one killed the other. Isn't that great? And both lived to tell about it. She said they get along fine now. In my own family, my oldest brother, who's 4 years my senior, he was the most handsome, the most intelligent, and the most athletic. And from the time he was very young, my mother would say they treated him like an adult when he was 2 years old, because he was the firstborn. Then the next brother came along 2 years later, and then I came along in our growing up years. The two younger ones, I and my middle brother, we both looked up so much to our oldest brother, and he set a great example for us, and we appreciated him. We had more, I think, back and forth between my middle brother and me than we did either of us with our older brother. Thank you for the stories you've shared, and continue to send them in. They will go into a blog post. And remember, when you send me something, you give me permission to share it and to include your name. I never want to embarrass anybody. I always try to make sure that I have your permission. So I think that's most of what I received from you. I heard about one mom that was asked, "Who is your favorite child?" And she paused and she waited and she kind of stroked her chin. And favorite child. She said, "Do I have to pick one of my own?" So that could be hard too, you know. Genesis chapter 37. We're going to see a scene that's very familiar, I think, to most of us who know the record of Joseph. And that is the bad news he brought back about his brothers in verse 2 we mentioned last week. Was he just giving a report that was accurate and objective and fair? Or was he snitching on them and tattling on them? The Bible doesn't tell us. Only that he told his father that there was some issue with his brothers. I suggested that Joseph would have said, I just reported. They would have said, no, he ratted on us. What do you think? Kind of depends on where you are in the family, doesn't it? So then verse 3 notes that Jacob had a preference for him. The Bible says that he was the son of Jacob's old age. Now, remember, Benjamin, Rachel's second child, had already been born also, and the mother had died in childbirth, but still Joseph was the firstborn of his first favorite wife. And that's where the favoritism goes. You can see it as we have noted in the past. If you look later in Genesis, chapter 44:27, Jacob says in front of his sons, my wife, as if he only had one, bore me 2 sons, as if he didn't have 12. He had such a tunnel vision, such an emphasis on Rachel and then on Joseph, that it's as if the others did not exist. And guess who picked that up? Guess who knew that? Well, everyone in the family knew that. Thank you so much. So this coat of many colors, King James Bible, right? Some Bibles say a vari-colored tunic. There are 2 Hebrew words here. One has to do with the outer garment, tunic, that someone would wear. And the other comes from a term for the palms of the hand. And it suggests, among other things, that the garment would have reached all the way down the sleeves to the palms, and also likely to the ankles. And so it was a garment not intended for someone who was working, because then you'd have to gird up your loins, right? And you'd have something short sleeves or no sleeves, so you could be busy in the field. But if you were the foreman or the supervisor, if you were the one overseeing everybody, you might have a special uniform. Apparently it was something like that. It could have been made of wool or linen. It could have had stripes. In fact, I think the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, calls it colorful. And so that seems to be part of the image as well. It's used one other place in the Bible, and we've run into this in Kelly's Sunday morning class. Tamar, we know, one of David's daughters, at one time wore a robe that was suited for the virgin daughters of King David. And it's the same 2 words. It's not found anywhere else, but it was suggested royalty, prominence, importance. And so even in the outward appearance, there was a distinction between son number 1 and all the others that were beneath him. So that special tunic, maybe multicolored, full length, not intended for everyday work in the field. And the Bible says in verse 4 that the brothers saw it. Don't you think that favoritism is something you can't keep secret? And that parents have to be aware, and grandparents, no matter how we try to not appear to play favorites, it's sometimes perceived, and there may be some legitimacy to it. They couldn't speak to Joseph anymore on friendly terms. It's the end of communication. They're growing farther and farther apart. And who is responsible? Jacob is. Now, Joseph didn't help when he brought back the bad news. Let me tell you what those other sons of yours are doing. But it's all building up together. And Jacob, he's either clueless or he doesn't care. He's not concerned about it because, after all, it's all about Joseph. And perhaps he had the idea that even if the others do feel second class or omitted or neglected, that's all right. And then I noticed, too, that the more the father promotes Joseph, the more the brothers want to do what? Take him down. And so the more he favors them, the more they hate him. And so his whole plan is backfiring. He's trying to force the others to submit to this brother who is younger than they are, born later to the favorite wife, Rachel. And so everything Jacob does is leading up to this terrible moment in which they plan to kill him and then sell him off as a slave going off to Egypt. So we noticed last time the 2 dreams, right? The sheaves representing the brothers bowing down to Joseph. We'll never do that. And see, that builds to it too. Because later on when they see him coming to check on them, later in this chapter, what do they say? We'll see what happens to his dreams now. We'll kill him. We'll drop him in this pit. And we'll guarantee that he can never have authority over us. And they didn't realize either. That would backfire. Because by putting him in that taxi cab going off to Egypt, that was the means God would use to put Joseph where? In the ruler's spot over them. So everybody's plan backfires. But I want you to imagine, what if each one had sought the will of God, the favor of God? What if each had said, you have your place in the family, I have my place in the family, I'll do what God allows me to do, I'll help you do what He's provided for you, and we will grow together. We're different. God loves us equally, but He has a different purpose, a different role, a different spot for each of us. So let me pause there and see, do you have a comment about what we've done so far? About Jacob's role or Joseph, or what's going on as the brothers are seeing all of this? Yes, Nancy?
One thing that I noticed is
Reuben.
He has a good heart.
Yes, yes.
He's worried about his brother.
He's worried about his brother. He has a good heart. Is Reuben the firstborn? He is. Has he messed up? Yes. Remember Bilhah, we noticed last time? So maybe he's trying to redeem himself, but he's also acting the part, like I told you about my oldest brother. Who's going to step up and take some responsibility and handle this situation so we don't do something we'll all regret for the rest of our lives? So Reuben's plan, we'll see, is to let Joseph wait in the pit till the other brothers aren't looking. And then he'll come back, and then the anger will have subsided. Everything will be all right. What's the problem? When he comes back, the pit is empty. So I'm going to say in a moment, he was trying to lead, but he didn't have the courage or the influence to cause his other siblings to sign up with him. They were in the majority. Reuben doesn't want to be part of that, but neither does he have the clout and the ability with his brothers to stop what they. So he has to work in an underhanded way that they won't see. But that is the role of the firstborn. He's trying to take some kind of leadership. Good. Thank you so much. Anybody else? As you see this develop, yes. Steve.
As a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ.
Foreshadowing of Jesus Christ.
God said of Jesus, "This is my beloved Son.
This is my beloved Son.
Listen to Him."
And listen to Him.
And the Jewish leaders were jealous of Him.
The Jewish leaders were jealous.
And so they tried to kill Him. They succeeded in killing Him.
Yes.
But again, like it did with Joseph, it backfired.
It backfires.
And it elevated Jesus over all of them.
Yeah, elevated Jesus over all of them. Good. So Mark 15:9. Remember Pontius Pilate? The Bible says Pilate knew that it was because of jealousy that the leaders handed Jesus over to him. Not only were they envious of Jesus, what about his own half-brothers, Steve, right? John 7 in verse 5. His own brothers didn't believe in him. And so in the opening of John 7, they say, why don't you go on up to Jerusalem and show yourself? You're a miracle worker. You want people to follow you. And then John says, by inspiration, even his own brothers, his half-brothers, the children of Joseph and Mary, did not believe in him. We will notice, lesson number 13 in this series is Christ-likeness. And we will draw parallels between Joseph and Jesus, including this, and they're remarkable. Thank you. And it backfired. Satan's plan backfired to get rid of Jesus. Thank you so much. See, did I miss anybody? John the Baptist. Yes. Yes. Herodias, yes, she did also. Look at John the Baptist. And you could see that same kind of jealousy and anger and rage. We've said before, a grudge will die unless you nurse it. And some Bibles say that she nursed a grudge. Talk about this desire to be favorites. What did James and John, the sons of Zebedee, ask for? Remember? Matthew 20 and Mark 10. And one of the Gospels says they brought their mother with. That's not fair. They brought their mother with them. Do for my sons whatever I ask. Well, what is it? One on your left and one on your right. And they may have imagined some kind of political or geographical kingdom in which there'd be a physical throne or whatever. Interesting what Jesus said. He didn't say those spots don't exist. What did he say? They are reserved. My Father will decide who goes in those seats. And in that same context, Jesus is saying, the greatest among you shall be the least. You want to be first? You become the last. And so who will be on, will there be seats? I mean, what will we see when we get to heaven? And will it be somebody we've never heard of, we've never known of, that was washing feet, that was feeding helpless people, that was ministering behind the scenes, never seeking the limelight? One of the joys of getting to heaven would be to meet these people that are just wonderful servants of Jesus Christ. Good. Thank you so much. Did I miss anybody? Okay, so then and now, how far back does this go in the family tree with the sap in it, Joseph's past? Well, what about Hagar and Sarah, right? You remember that Hagar had Ishmael. Who's her favorite going to be? Sarah, of course, had Isaac, and the result was jealousy, and they had to separate. And Hagar was kicked out, and God provided for her at a well, and she called it Bir Lahai Roy, the well of the living sees me. God saw her in her grief, even though she was not part of this family line. Well, what about Isaac and Rebekah? True? And Esau cooked the game, and Jacob not of that same talent and interest. And so what happens as a result? Well, they deceive Isaac. The mother puts it together and sends Jacob in there, and that backfires because Jacob has to run away and gone for at least 20 years. Now what about Rachel and Leah? Do we see the same cycle over and over with the same results? Why doesn't anyone learn and say, I'm not going to do what mom and dad did, what the grandparents did, what the great-grandparents did? Instead, I think one of the causes of favoritism is the home environment in which a person grew up. I think that if a family is involved in all of this, then the child thinks that's the way life works. Pick your favorite and go with it, and other people will have to find their own way. So Jacob, of course, we talked about that. Over all the others, he wants Rachel's children. Something we need to notice in Genesis. Did God have specific roles for particular people? He did. Did God choose Abraham and say, through you, all the families, all the nations of the earth will be blessed? Did that mean that God only loved Abraham? Or did it mean that through Abraham, he would make his love known to the entire world? So there's a verse in which before Jacob and Esau are even born, remember they're wrestling in the womb? And God said, the older will serve the younger. Esau will serve Jacob. Is that the way it turned out? It's fascinating because these individuals acted out of their own personalities, their own interest. They were free agents, and yet God had said, this is the way they're going to act, and this will be the outcome. We didn't have time last week, but I did send it out in the email, Genesis 36, before our chapter, and I called it Esau's Tragic Decisions and Destiny. And if you look back at that slide, it outlines how Esau married away from the family, married Ishmaelites, so forth. He did what his parents told him not to do, maybe partly in reaction against the favoritism toward Jacob. But Esau ends up off away from these blessings because of his own choices, and not only because God made this statement. So sometimes people will say, well, if God doesn't show favorites, how come he chose Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? Well, he chose them for particular purposes, but not to the exclusion of others. In fact, through Joseph, who is God going to save? The entire family. When the famine, right? He's going to save all of Egypt. He's going to save the world through what happens to Joseph. Okay? Bonnie? Right. So, same for us. So, one way to approach and overcome favoritism is to say, I'm not the firstborn. My brother is. I can look up to him, respect him, appreciate him. I remember my oldest brother, obviously the first one to get his driver's license. I was a bit jealous at the time because I didn't get to drive yet. But my brother got a job and he saved up and he bought a brand new car. And I hadn't been driving that long, and I was going to go out one evening, and my brother gave me the keys to his brand new car. Do you think that's something I remember now? My brother took me to his closet and offered me any of his clothes that I wanted to wear. My brother taught me math because he was a whiz. My brother was the first one to try to figure out girls. And he helped my middle brother, and he helped me. See, in other words, I learned to value the fact that he had a spot in the family I didn't have. I was the youngest. Maybe I was somewhat spoiled. That's what they say. I didn't want to be the youngest, but now I do. It's funny how the tables turned when you reach a certain age in life, you know, and you can tease your older siblings because they crossed a certain milestone before you did. Your thoughts, anybody? All right, so let's look now at what happens beginning at verse 12. This is where Jacob sends Joseph to see about his brothers. This is 37:12. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. Then he said, Go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, What are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are pasturing the flock. Then the man said, They have moved from here, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. As a sidelight, one of the many reasons I believe the Bible is the inclusion of details like this. If you were making up a story, you wouldn't have Joseph go to Shechem and find out that's the wrong place and move on to Dothan. You wouldn't have this man out there in the field and this question, where are my, I remember your brothers, they went that way. That wouldn't be in there. And that detail, and yet the Bible is so concise, you know. It doesn't take page after page to tell what happened. And yet what it tells is so authentic because it's the Word of God. So I want to show you on the screen there how Joseph is going to go from Hebron to Shechem. Remember, Shechem is where the horrible incident with Dinah happened. And Shechem is also where Jacob bought the field. And it's in that area that Joseph would be buried, and where Jacob's well, talked about the Samaritan woman. That's the area around Shechem. And then he's going to go to Dothan. We're going to see in a moment so here we are with Hebron. And then he goes up to Shechem. They're not there. And so he goes farther northeast to Dothan. Well, meanwhile, as you look at we'll have to come on, verse 18, they're going to see him. And then verse 25, the Ishmaelites come. So here's what the Ishmaelites or Midianites do. They come from Gilead. We've talked about this area before. Gilead is where Jacob had fled from Laban. Laban came running after him, and he caught up with him at Gilead. And they made that covenant, you remember? Remember drawing the line in the back seat of the car? You stay on your side, I'll stay on mine. And so they're going to come, and at just the right time, we'll have a separate lesson later on providence. They had to leave Gilead at just the time they did, traveled at just the speed they did, so that they arrived at Dothan just at the time when Joseph is in the pit and the brothers are about to kill him. Isn't that remarkable? Reminds me in the New Testament of Philip and the Ethiopian in Acts chapter 8. So anyway, then they're going to take him as a slave. They're going to buy him for 20 shekels. We'll come to that in a moment. And they will head down south toward Egypt. So Jacob sends Joseph. What could possibly go wrong? I have to ask myself, 17 years this has been building between Joseph and his brothers. Where was the father? Doesn't he see this? The dreams have antagonized Joseph's brothers. His father rebuked him over the second dream about the sun, moon, and stars. And now the father thinks it's safe to send Joseph off. He underestimated jealousy, his own special treatment of Joseph, the attitude and anger. I say parents can't hide their favoritism, but I wouldn't think the brothers could hide their animosity either. Jacob, was he absent father? Passive? Possibly so. So here's the plot. Let's kill him and kill his dreams. Let's kill him first, and then we'll just put his dead body in the pit. Or they may have wanted to put him in the pit alive. The Bible says it was a dry pit, and let him die a slow and agonizing death. Back to what Chuck said about Herodias and wanting John's head. Some anger that's not dealt with, that builds. And how could someone do this to their brother? How could Herodias have wanted that to happen to John? Well, it's been festering. It's been building. They've been feeding it 17 years, perhaps. Okay, so here's Reuben's plan. I think the ladies were mentioning. Keep him alive, come back and get him later. And then verse 25 says they sat down for lunch. Callous, indifferent, delighted, pleased with themselves. Hey, it's lunchtime. And Joseph is down there in the pit. Only later in the book, when the brothers are talking with each other, they've been carrying this guilt with them all that time. And one of them says, "Don't we remember when our brother pleaded with us and we wouldn't listen to him?" Joseph was crying. Teenage, young man, 17, he's crying while his brothers are sitting down to eat. He doesn't know if he will live or die. He doesn't know how long he will last. There's no food. There's no water. As far as he could tell, this is the end of the rope, and they don't care. It's another thing that families struggle with today: indifference, lack of attention, going about their own lives, especially in some families as they get older and cease to stay in touch and notice what's happening to their brothers and sisters. So now the Ishmaelites come, and they're on a mission. It's all business for them. They have exports. And here you can see, again, the detail in Genesis stands out. Look at verse 25. They're sitting down to eat, and they look up, and here comes the caravan. Aromatic gum, balm, and myrrh. They've got spices and so forth to deliver and make some money. The Bible calls them Ishmaelites and also calls them Midianites. The first name would suggest they descended from whom? Ishmael. That was a hard one, wasn't it? The Midianites may suggest they were descended from Midian, who was Abraham's son, not by Sarah, but by Keturah. After Sarah died, Abraham married Keturah, and Midian was born. I've given you the reference there. And so these could be an intermingling of the two, those ones from Ishmael and the ones from Midian, or it could be they just lived in that same area. We're not told. And so Judah has a proposal. Hey, we can all win with this deal, you see. So we can make some money. We can avoid the guilt of taking his life. And hey, he's our brother. We should do something nice. Let's sell him, you know. Instead of ending his life, we can preserve his life. We'd send him off to a horrible situation, but we're not going to kill him. And we can split the money. It's a win-win. You see, everybody comes out ahead. Isn't it interesting how we can rationalize and how something that a year or two ago we never would have considered doing. That's wrong, wrong. And if we see somebody else do it, nah. And yet, in certain situations, we begin to soften, perhaps, to be more inclined, and we quench the conscience, and then we'll do something we never thought we would do. David? After listening to him cry, they pull him up out of the pit, only to sell him off. Yes. Yes. So you wonder, David, when they pulled him up, how long did it take him to figure out what was going on? Was he being rescued? No, he's being transferred. He's being sent off to slavery. Good point. Anybody else? Yes. Yes, Butch is right. He's being sold to his distant relatives. That's right. It's all part of the family, isn't it, Butch? So everybody, when you read Genesis, they all go back to the same ancestors. And so you remember Jacob making the deal with Esau to turn a quick profit. What do the Ishmaelites want to do? Yes, we can buy him, and then we can jack up the price when we get to Egypt. All part of the family. And it's not personal, right, Butch? It's not personal. It's business. It's business. Good. Anybody else? Okay, so I have this for you. I'm curious myself, and the Bible talks about shekels. And so the idea that these 20 shekels might have been something like the chain, the amount of that was used there. It was apparently the price of a common slave, maybe the base price. You see later in the Bible, 30 shekels, 30 pieces, and so forth. It wasn't a lot of money. And so that's something for us to keep in mind. So you think about this too. How did Jacob appraise Joseph? Give him the coat. Give him the prominence. Put his brothers under him. Send him to report on them. How do the Ishmaelites rate Joseph? We give you 20 coins for him. Just like everybody else. Makes you think that in God's eyes, each person is special and unique with potential to serve God and make a difference in this world. But it's so easy just to treat people as if they're just like everybody else and size them up. So when the Ishmaelites saw Joseph, they saw a little money. They just saw a human being, human trafficking, you might even say. So much of that terribly is going on. But in Jacob's eyes, or in God's eyes, there was a plan for Joseph. Good. Okay. Yes, Nancy? Yes. Where was Reuben when the brothers came up with this plan? Yes. And now he comes back. So he should have kept an eye on his prize. And it's as if he's gone out of the way or something. What does he have to do, you know? And did he miss the meal? I mean, you can't tell. And that's an interesting question. We're not told. Boy, that's... Okay, so he comes back. Joseph is gone. And in Hebrew, he says to himself, you know, what am I going to do? What will I say? And so I've suggested he had some responsibility, and he demonstrated that, but he didn't have the courage or the influence to change the direction his brothers wanted to go. Maybe it was too late now to correct it. If he had brought them in from the beginning, this wouldn't have happened. If they would have gone along with him. So now the brothers' deception, 31 and 32. How could they do this to their father? Let's soak this fancy garment that our father gave him in the blood of a male goat. This is verse 31. And let's just show it to Jacob and let him draw the conclusion he's going to draw. How could they do it? Well, we said they hated Joseph. How did they feel about their father? The Bible never says in so many words that they were angry with him or upset. And yet they lived with all of this through 17 years. And so it apparently didn't bother their conscience too much to let their father live for years with the mistaken belief that Joseph was dead. Yes, Diana? Yes. Yes, that's right. He didn't call him Joseph. He said, "Is this your son's coat? Your son." And when they saw him coming from a distance, didn't they call him that dreamer? They saw him, that dreamer, and they called him your son, rather than our flesh and blood. They had cut off emotionally the relationship they had with him. So if Joseph is age 17 at this time, how old is he when he becomes ruler of Egypt? 30. 30. So age 17 to 30, and then it's going to be later on. You remember they're going to have the feast and the famine, and it's while the famine is still going on that he sends for his father. All those years. The brothers would live with the guilt, and the father would live with the pain. The father would have a pain that was not based in reality. I think something that Dave knows well about is the fact, sometimes they call it cognitive processing. It's the fact that we often react to things not as they really are, but as we perceive them to be. If we believe something that's false and we act according to it, it may not even be true, but because we think it is. And that's the way it will be for him. It will be as if Joseph is dead. Anybody else? All right. So Jacob says, I'm going to die. I'm going to take this to the grave. I will never get over this. That makes me think of grief share also. The time when it's so dark and it's so heavy, I can't face another day. I'm not going to make it any longer. And Jacob will make it longer, and he will be reunited with Joseph. But at the time, it's too much for him to bear. So, meanwhile, Joseph arrives in Egypt. And this is the end for Joseph, right? No. The end is the beginning. You know, we use the word commencement when people leave a certain level of schooling. What does commencement mean? Beginning. You're commencing. And so we try to tell young people, you're not ending you're starting on a new chapter. Sometimes when things look the worst, they're about to become the best. Sometimes when you can't stand it anymore, God provides an open door or a window. I mean, who would think that through Potiphar and all that with Potiphar's wife were coming to? Terrible. But that Joseph loves God, serves God, keeps his morality, and God works through him and through his faith. Steve?
I would say even further that when we go through these struggles in life, nothing is without God's permission. He can step in at any time and alter the course of.
Okay, Steve is saying nothing happens without God's permission. He could step in at any time and intervene.
But often, like in this case with Joseph, he knew that he needed to humble Joseph and perhaps prepare him.
This would humble Joseph and prepare him to be the leader he would be.
We don't know how much of it was already Joseph's personality and how much of it was this crucible that he was placed in, but that's where faith comes in.
That's right. And God will use in our lives also the good and the bad to mold us and make us more into the image of Christ. That does not mean that God endorses anything that's wrong or that he causes any sin or temptation. But God is so masterful and God is such a genius, we fall at our feet before him. He can take the worst of things and make all things work together for good. And we need to say too that God is not obligated to intervene. You know, sometimes we wonder in our lives, why didn't God stop that person, Why didn't God prevent that accident or that illness? Or why didn't God provide a cure? God is not obligated. And many times, God allows human beings to act without His direct intervention. And yet He's behind the scenes in His providence. Yes? Why, you've been asked why you weren't angry when your husband Marcus died.
And my response, the only thing I could think of was God said no to His own Son.
God said no to His own Son. Yes, and His Son prayed, His Son prayed, let this cup pass from me, and that didn't happen. That's exactly right.
He can say no to me.
He can say no. He can say later. He can say, I have a different plan. And that's why, what do? We trust and obey, right, Dana? No matter what. We just hold on, and God will take care of it. Yeah, David?
You know, as we study the Old Testament, all of these
As we study the Old Testament, these characters
characters and all these families,
and families,
we talk about what God's relationship is.
yes.
God's relationship is
He's what?
always there.
God is always there. Yes.
He's not controlling.
He's not controlling. We're not puppets. He's not manipulating free will. Yes.
You look at all of these stories, these brothers and these wives and all the things that are taking place. He's showing us all of this because we're going to experience it.
We will experience it. And He shows us this.
Every bit of this.
Yes.
Maybe not the exact same thing,
Yes.
but the testing that's
The testing
from what takes place in
in our
our life,
lives, what our children do, and
what our families do,
that's right.
and we just have to, like Joseph, what did Joseph do?
What did Joseph do?
Out of that pit and they hauled him off and they put him in slavery.
Yes.
He did what he thought was right.
Joseph did what he thought was right.
He believed in God.
That's right. He believed in God, and he believed in the dreams God had given him.
And he had the dream
That's right.
given him. And so it just goes from there to there. And
Yes.
it's true in our life.
It's true in our lives. And the more we know this book, the more we can see what's going on in our own lives. Isn't that right? And we recognize in families and the church, with neighbors and coworkers, we see something, we experience something, and we find that we are one of these characters. This is what David's saying. We are this person who did this or that, or someone did that to us. And another good point coming out of what David said is that we only get to choose what we do. Or Potiphar, all he gets to choose is what he does. And you and I are in the very same situation. So why in the world would we let somebody else keep us from choosing to honor the Lord? Why in the world would we let something get between us and God? I don't know how Joseph did it. I mean, his situation was harder than maybe we can imagine. But he's going to stay true regardless because he makes his own choices. And so do you. Good point. Did I miss anybody else? Oh, yes.
So now,
If you fast forward
to now,
to now,
and Jesus himself says, unless you forgive your brother,
oh, yes.
I will not forgive
Yes. Jesus,
you. We should preach that in the church.
yes. Wow. And when Jesus, this is what Chuck's saying, when Jesus taught us to pray, he said, Father, forgive us our debts as we have passed. We have already forgiven our debtors. I love what one little boy prayed. He said, God, forgive us our trash passes as we forgive those who pass trash against us. So this is a prerequisite. This is coming to ask God, not God, if you'll forgive me, then I will forgive. Forgive me as I have forgiven. Forgiveness. It sets everybody free. Imagine these brothers, if they would have confessed their wrong, if they would have come clean with their father and each other and with God, how different their lives would be also. Well, we then noticed 13 plus years, age 17 for Joseph to age 30 plus. They would carry their secret, hide it from their father. Watch their father cry. Watch his despair, his loneliness, his agony. And what they say, he has it coming to him. I don't know. And their own guilt. So, yes, Barbara? We don't know exactly what was happening to Joseph.
But he has begun to see that God is planning his life.
Yes, those dreams. He believes that God has a plan for his life. We're going to see him next time falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. We're going to see him thrown in prison that allows him to be in a position to interpret the dreams of the other prisoners. Through that, he's eventually going to come before Pharaoh. Yeah, he wins all the way through. He's from the pit to the peak again, and to the peak again, and because he has his eyes on God. Well, we mentioned just a few things that might contribute to favoritism and jealousy. Maybe I grew up in a family, or you did, like that. Birth order, maybe the first one is favored or whatever. Or maybe there's insecurity on the part of a child that I feel like I'm being neglected, and different personalities or behavior. One child needs more discipline than the other. Or one child needs more furthered education, more support financially or something than others, and so forth. Varying circumstances that go on with our children. Sometimes a parent will favor the child that's more similar to the parent. One told me that, I think someone that's here tonight told me that the father preferred the daughter in your family, and the mother preferred, right? The mother preferred the son, that kind of opposite gender sort of thing. And then lack of awareness. I think if we assume that we're not playing favorites, then possibly there are ways that we actually do show preference, and we never really address it because we haven't really looked at it. So these are just some ideas to deal with favoritism, and it can be eye-opening to ask your children, what do they think about this matter as to their feeling loved and their needs being met and their care and their support. When we adjust our approach, our time and money, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're preferring one or another, but they're at different situations and have different concerns, and we do for them. Thank you for being in our class. If you are not enrolled, please email me, and I'll send you notes early this week. And please invite others. And those that are online, again, thank you once more. Please invite others to join us online. God bless everybody. Thank you.